Lisa, would you mind to introduce our esteemed panelists? Thank you.
Of course. So our first panelist is Beth Beattie. Beth Beattie is counsel with the Ministry of the Attorney General Civil Law Division, Ministry of Health, where she specializes in the areas of mental health, human rights, and OHIP eligibility. She appears before the Consent and Capacity Board, Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, and the Health Services Appeal and Review Board. Prior to working with the MOH, Beth was the Coordinator and Legal Counsel, Dispute Resolution Office at the Ministry of the Attorney General. Beth taught extensively in the field of dispute resolution and acted as a neutral third party, providing facilitation, mediation, and fact-finding investigation services. Beth was called to the bar in 1994. She has an LLB from Dalhousie University and an LLM from Osgoode Hall Law School. In 2002, Beth was diagnosed with bipolar I disorder. She was closeted for many years about her mental illnesses and has recently become an advocate for speaking about one's mental illness as a means of ending the stigma and isolation surrounding it. A fun fact about Beth, she is a degenerate poker player. Our second panelist is Deborah Moriah. Deborah Moriah is a Toronto area paralegal and one of the founding members and directors of the Ontario Association of Black Paralegals. She was licensed by the Law Society of Ontario in 2016 and opened her practice in 2018. Deborah has worked in several areas of law, including immigration, small claims, various social justice tribunals, and consumer protection. She also holds a degree in professional writing and communication studies from York University. In 2020, she organized a group of Black legal professionals to create the Ontario Association of Black Paralegals, an association committed to providing improved and increased access to justice to BIPOC Ontarians, helping Black legal professionals navigate systemic discrimination and educating all legal professionals on the importance of recognizing, denouncing, and combating systemic discrimination in the justice system. Deborah was recommended by the LSO and appointed by the Ministry of the Attorney General to the Legal Aid Ontario Board of Directors in 2021 for a 2-year term. A fun fact about Deborah, prior to her legal career, Deborah wrote young adult fiction under a pseudonym. So our next panelist is Doron Gold. Doron Gold is a staff clinician at Homewood Health, the provider of the Ontario Legal Professions Member Assistance Program. He is a registered social worker, certified professional coach, and a psychotherapist, as well as having previously practiced law for 10 years, primarily as a family and civil litigator. Since 2006, Doron has assisted lawyers, paralegals, law students, judges, and their immediate family members with personal and professional issues such as addiction, depression, anxiety, and career stress. Doron's role at Homewood Health includes psychotherapy with clients, assisting with ongoing management of Homewood's peer volunteer program, as well as providing workshops and presentations to various groups in the community. Doron has written and been quoted extensively in publications such as Lawyers Weekly, Law Times, Canadian Lawyer, and Law Pro magazine on various topics related to lawyer distress and wellness. As well, Doron has written a regular lawyer therapist column in the Law Times. Doron has been asked to speak to various groups throughout Ontario on topics as varied as work-life balance, lawyer stress, retirement, vicarious trauma, and compassion fatigue. He is the co-author of the Ontario Bar Association's Mental Health and Wellness in the Legal Profession online course and was the recipient of the 2016 CBA Wellness Forum Award of Excellence. A fun fact about Doron, he was a club DJ for 20 years. Some of those years occurred while he was practicing law.
Nice.
Our next panelist is Jennifer Gold. Jennifer Gold is president of the Women's Law Association of Ontario and a partner of the law firm Wood Gold LLP, a boutique law firm in Peel Region. Jennifer Gold and her partner sought to create an alternative to the traditional law firm and thereby achieve work-life balance and an inclusive workplace. These efforts were noted by Carol Gore in her article for the Toronto Star entitled Women Create Family-Friendly Law Practice, and the Ontario Bar Association podcast, Work That Works. In the practice of family law, Jennifer often represents survivors of family violence. Her past volunteer work includes service to North York Women's Shelter as a volunteer and board member. Jennifer was recently appointed to the Board of Directors Legal Aid Ontario and is chair of LAO's Audit and Finance Committee. She is a dispute resolution officer for the Superior Court of Justice in Kitchener and Welland. Jennifer has a keen interest in the art of family law, de-escalating conflict, and seeing parties achieve a positive resolution. Jennifer is a 2017 recipient of the Lexpert Zenith Awards, celebrating the advancement of women in the legal profession, and the 2021 recipient of the Award of Excellence in the Promotion of Women's Equality, presented by the Ontario Bar Association Women Lawyers Forum. She was recently appointed a member of the Advisory Council for the Law Society of Ontario's Access to Innovation pilot project, which will allow providers of innovative technological legal services to serve consumers while complying with operating conditions that protect the public. A fun fact about Jennifer: prior to the pandemic, she sang in a competitive barbershop quartet and a barbershop chorus for several years. Our next panelist is Saleha Khan. Saleha's areas of expertise include social justice, human rights and responsibilities, hate crimes, and the settlement sector's challenges and opportunities with new Canadians. She has worked in the human capital and diversity fields for more than a decade. She has volunteered with child and youth organizations that focus on bullying and the protection of children from the dangers of the internet. She is also involved in volunteer efforts at empowering women and members of immigrant communities regarding issues of partner and domestic abuse. Saleha is the co-founder of the Family Honor Project, housed out of London, Ontario. She is also a charter member of the London chapter for Seroptimus International. Saleha was recognized by the Canadian Council of Muslim Women for the Women Who Inspire Award for the year 2015. A little about Saleha in her own words. I have been involved in diversity and inclusion development for almost 19 years now. I consider myself to be one of those blessed ones who work in the same field where their passions and interests lie. I grew up in a multilingual and multicultural setting, and I find that experience has helped me gain insights into human behavior that has supported my journey in leadership development for those entrusted to me. I see this work as a social and ethical responsibility that needs critical perspective and global viewpoints to not only begin courageous conversations in safe spaces, but to create those bold places where conversations turn into actions that bring about cultural shift. A fun fact about Saleha: she is currently an MPA candidate through Western University. Our final panelist is Dr. Vinita Puri. Dr. Puri is a highly skilled industrial organizational psychologist, registered social worker, mediator, coach, and consultant. For nearly 20 years, she has worked with diverse populations across organizational and community-based settings, including correctional facilities, hospitals, educational institutions, addiction recovery treatment centers, and regulatory boards. At the present time, she works with the Workplace Interventions Department of Homewood Health and is a board member of the John Howard Society, Peel, Halton, Dufferin. Vinita is the reigning Miss Canada World Universal Elite 2021 to 2022. She has been using her title as a platform to inspire and empower women across Canada to achieve their highest potential. For example, she is a national spokesperson for LEA International Foundation. This is a Canadian-based not-for-profit organization that provides educational and psychosocial supports to young women and girls from marginalized and underprivileged communities. In addition, she is the Vice President of Philanthropy for Omega Upsilon Pi Canada, which aims to foster diversity, equity, and inclusion through philanthropy and mentorship of all women. In August of 2021, she received the Community Service Award from the International Council of the Golden Key Society. In September of 2021, she was appointed as the Director of Media and Communications for McMaster University Golden Key and a member of the Human Rights and Social Justice Committee of the Canadian Psychological Association. For all of her humanitarian efforts, Vinita was awarded an honorary doctorate by the American University, which is affiliated with the United Nations Diplomatic Mission for Global Peace, USA, and recognized as a Goodwill Ambassador for 2021. Vinita is a social change maker and hopes to find work in academia and research at an institution of higher learning. A fun fact about Vinita: she is the reigning Miss Canada World Universal Elite 2021-2022. And that is all of our panelists.
Thank you so much for introducing all our esteemed panelists, Kalisa. And I may please say that we should introduce our question and answer section. And we're going to go with different questions that we already have kind of set up. And I'm going to start picking randomly. Our first question would be, what legal professionals find most challenging with their jobs and employment? And I would say this question would be for Jennifer.
Thank you. The information I want to share is more anecdotal, and I would say is based on my experience as a family lawyer and my involvement with the Women's Law Association of Ontario. In practice, I think there are different stressors throughout your career. In the early years of your practice, some of the stress comes from learning the law and developing competency. While you're in practice itself, stressors come in the form of opposing parties or other professionals, the client, and also if you're running your own business, the administrative work involved. I practice family law, which is particularly stressful, and there's been a great deal of discussion regarding vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout. I'd like to highlight that women also bear the greater burden of family and caregiver functions, and it can be extremely stressful juggling practice and the needs of others. And I think this has been exacerbated by the pandemic, with many women also juggling online school along with everything else. Now, I'd like to point to a survey done by CAMH. They surveyed just over 1,000 adults, and this was in September 2020. And that was when elementary and high schools were reopening. And that survey revealed that women had higher levels of anxiety and loneliness than men. And parents of children under 18 had higher levels of depression compared to adults without children in this age group. Nearly 1/4 of women indicated moderate to severe anxiety, significantly higher than the 17.9% found among men. And the same gender gap was evident in reports of loneliness. It was 23% for women, 17% for men. Now, overall, parents with children under 18 living at home were more likely to report feeling depressed than adults without children. And then finally, I want to speak to the experience of being a racialized person in this profession. Quite often, because of my brown skin, I deal with microaggressions and macroaggressions, and they can be from the court, from clients, and other legal professionals. And for instance, I've been questioned as to whether I'm counsel. And in one instance that was deeply embarrassing was when I was representing a white male client, and the court staff assumed he was counsel and I was the client. Now, Doron may be able to share more on this topic of work stressors based on his own experience with the member assistance program.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. I can tell you that I hear stories like you just told over and over and over in various contexts. Are you the legal assistant? And also just the scrutiny that one bears if one looks a certain way. Whether a judge is more a stickler for detail with a certain kind of lawyer versus others who are part of the boys club who just kind of fit in and everyone's getting along. And so absolutely, there are a few things I would illuminate in terms of my work as a therapist working with lawyers and paralegals and law and paralegal students, and have for the last few years. One that's right at the top of the list is probably one that's not surprising, which is workload. The amount of stress a person has simply by virtue of the amount of work they have on their plate, and how much agency they feel in their ability to say, I've got enough, can't take any more, please give it to someone else. Especially if you're new in the profession, you don't feel like you have that power to say no to anyone. So it gets piled on and piled on and piled on. Henry Ford famously said that givers need to set limits because takers seldom do. But the giver, in this case, the person giving labor, doesn't always have the power to do that, is afraid to look like they're difficult or not diligent. So that workload piece really affects people because, for instance, there's a study out of the University of Toronto from, I believe, 2016, studying Bay Street lawyers and determining that they, in fact, have a higher incidence of depression than other lawyers, and thinking that Bay Street is the top of the mountain, as we were taught. You would think that they would be happier by virtue of their status, but they described it as the status health paradox, where they, more than anything else, were burdened by the amount of work they were expected to do in a given period of time, how much time they therefore had for family and self-care and everything else, that no matter how much money they were making, it wasn't enough to mitigate against the negative impact that they experienced on their mental health, on their physical health. So add in something that Jennifer mentioned, and I'll just add to it, which is the incivility that can exist in the profession. I remember it when I was a lawyer, and I practiced for about 10 years. Family lawyers on the other side who were acting as though the child was their child. They were laying in bed the night before thinking about how important it is to beat this terrible person who is representing this person who wants to take these children. They personalize it, and they can be really awful. I specifically remember doing an examination for discovery once early in my career where the managing partner at Blake's made me cry, not in front of him. I waited till lunchtime and cried in my car. But the intensity of it, the intensity of the rudeness, it's really, really weighs on people. It's one of the reasons I got out of law, was simply I didn't want to fight all the time. I didn't want to get in people's faces all the time. And so I pulled back from that. But it's not just that, it's also what Jennifer mentioned about vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. A lot of us, being legal professionals, hold it in. We think that we shouldn't show, especially in litigation type work where there's an adversarial process, we shouldn't show any type of, and I'm putting this in quotes, weakness, because it's not weakness, it's vulnerability. But we hold it back. We're afraid, we're ashamed. We don't want people to know that we're struggling. So we hold it in, we don't talk to anyone about it, and it weighs us down. And things like vicarious trauma, things where you're exposed to any number of potentially really awful things. Criminal lawyers go through it, refugee lawyers go through it, family lawyers go through it, as do paralegals working in the field. One needs outlets for that kind of emotional impact. One needs people to talk to, one needs therapists, debrief groups in the office, whatever it takes. But we're not very good at that in our profession, and we need to get better at it. One of the other things that racks people a lot in the profession is perfectionism, because most people in our profession think that that's actually a good thing. Being a perfectionist is an attribute, is it not? It's what got me here. It's also what's going to burn you out. Perfection does not exist in the human condition. but for perhaps mathematics. Perfectionism is a trap, because if you are always trying to do more and more and more and more, because there's never enough, because you don't know what enough is, you're never going to be satisfied. You're never going to be good enough. And you're always going to be anxious, because there's always chasing perfect. And since perfect is impossible, you're just chasing all the time. If you can find your good enough, that place where you know you've done everything that is reasonable, not everything that is possible, but everything that is reasonable, that can really take a burden off of you. And along the lines of that, many of you have probably heard of the concept of imposter syndrome. It's many professions, but the legal profession in particular. Imposter syndrome is essentially this notion that while you are in fact qualified, eminently qualified, you don't feel like you're qualified. You feel like you're fooling everyone, and any minute they're going to realize it. My mother, who's now 88, was a widely regarded educator, school principal, honorary doctorate from an educational institution in the States. And until the day she retired, she thought they were going to walk into her office any moment and say, "We just realized you have no idea what you're doing. Get out." She was, thought of as a leader in the community, and yet somehow she inside of her thought, not good enough, not smart enough. Justice Moldaver of the Supreme Court of Canada spoke of this a couple of years ago, sitting on the Supreme Court of Canada, and yet believing that, maybe I'm not up to this. Maybe I'm not qualified. So it's not about intelligence. It's not about experience. It's about what you believe about yourself. And the last thing I'll say on this topic is one of the greatest distresses I see in the legal profession is people who are living out of alignment with their values, who are doing work that goes against what they believe in or just isn't interesting to them. People who are spending their days doing things that either cause them anxiety or actually make them feel gross because they just don't believe in what they're doing. They actually think it might be counterproductive. And finding work that aligns with what you care about and what makes you fascinated and passionate and also aligns with your morals and your values, really important for a sustainable paralegal practice.
Thank you, Doron, for your contribution. That's really key, I think, for many legal professionals. That includes people that are going into the field or people that are working in the field, and that's very important to highlight. So I'm going to ask the next question: what struggles do they face, or how they overcome those struggles that we just mentioned previously in mental health? And this question will go towards Beth.
Yeah, thanks very much, Leo. And thanks so much for having me here today. I've been practicing litigation for almost 30 years, and I know that law clerks, paralegals are often the backbone of law firms. And it's a very stressful profession that you're in. And if you go out on your own, I'm sure it's got its own stressors as well. So I'm delighted that we're here tonight talking about mental health. So just a little bit about my story is that when I was 27, I was diagnosed with a major depressive episode. I was a first-year lawyer at one of the big Bay Street firms, and I slipped into a very dark place. And I got some help, and I dug myself out. And then a few years went by, and ultimately, when I was 35 years old, I had a major manic episode and was floridly psychotic, meaning that I lost touch with reality and ended up being hospitalized at CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health here in Toronto, for 2 weeks. And I was put there under the Mental Health Act, a Form 1 and then a Form 3. And when I was discharged from hospital, two issues kept going through my mind. The first one was I was convinced I was going to get sick again. I had read lots of books and articles about bipolar disorder, and it's apparent that lots of people, perhaps most people with bipolar disorder, do relapse, get depressed, get manic, both. And I am no one special, so I thought it was just a matter of time before I would get sick again. And the second issue was I was mortified at the thought that people would find out about my illness and my hospitalization. I was particularly concerned about how it would impact on me and my career as a lawyer, because I wanted to be seen as strong and unflappable. And I thought that if people knew, whether it was colleagues, clients, opposing counsel, if they knew I had bipolar disorder, they would look down on me. So the stereotype is that those of us with bipolar disorder were inherently unstable and unreliable, and I certainly didn't want to be seen in those terms. So pretty much for 14 years, I didn't tell anyone outside my family and my closest friends about my condition. So the first 10 months after discharge from hospital were very difficult. I had 2 major depressive episodes, and then my mood stabilized. And I haven't had any mania or depression. It's going on almost 20 years now. I do live with an anxiety disorder that is a day-to-day struggle. And in terms of how I got to be so well after such a difficult illness, is I sort of had a wellness plan in place. I didn't really articulate it, but in looking back over the years, I realized that there are several prongs to it. And the first one is medication. And at first I was very reluctant to take medication, but now I take it religiously. I see it as better living through chemistry. It's no different than people with diabetes needing insulin, or someone who's an epileptic taking an anticonvulsant. I have wonky brain chemistry that causes the bipolarity, and the medication I take corrects that wonkiness. So I don't see it as a weakness to take medication. In fact, I see it as the way for me to take control of my life. Cardiovascular exercise and producing those endorphins, those feel-good neurotransmitters, has been absolutely key. Laying off the alcohol. I'm still a social drinker, and I do imbibe from time to time, but not very much. And if I'm struggling with anything in my personal life or at work, I skip cocktail hour. And I do therapy. We're going to talk a bit more about therapy later on this evening, but I really rely on it to get me through difficult times. And finally, just to rely on my family and friends, and now my colleagues, because since I disclosed my illness about 4 years ago, they've been wonderfully supportive. So I reach out to them when I'm struggling. So that's sort of, with that package in place, I've been able to manage my illness quite well.
And maybe we can add more to that kind of experience with Deborah. Deborah, what do you think about it?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me here this evening. And I just want to say what my colleagues have shared so far is, I think, maybe something that a lot of us experience and we don't talk about as much as we should. So it's so nice to be here and have this conversation. So I actually wanted to share a little bit personally that I haven't actually ever shared publicly before. Just before the pandemic, I actually took a mental health leave. And it was something that I didn't share widely with anyone. I had said I was taking a medical leave. And again, I think it was one of those things where you're unsure of whether or not people will see you as weak, maybe think that you can't handle it. And I decided to take the leave because I was really struggling with work-life balance and burnout. And a lot of that was because of the systemic discrimination I was facing on the job. Being a paralegal is hard enough. I don't know, but any other paralegals here tonight, but I have definitely experienced that aggression, the microaggressions of just being a paralegal in this field, like in the profession, and people not thinking that you're competent enough because you're a paralegal. On top of that, being a woman, it was difficult being in that position, and being a Black woman. I had many instances where I would go to court and be thought to be the client, or just be really treated very badly by other counsel, other paralegals, and even judges in some instances. And I remember the first experience that I had, I was shocked. I wasn't expecting it. I remember going into court and just feeling like, I'm so prepared, this is great, I'm so excited. And then walking into the settlement conference and just being treated horribly and just not knowing what to do. And I remember going back to my office and speaking to my mentor at the time. And he just told me that, I mean, what can you do at this point? He said, you can complain about it, you can make a complaint, but it could be career suicide for lack of a better term. And I was like, well, I was scared. I was a young paralegal. I didn't really know what I was doing. And so I thought, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to live with it. But I mean, there are resources out there, and I wish I had known them at the time. And so it's great to have these types of conversations because we need to talk about this. Paralegals and lawyers, licensees need to know that they have an outlet, they have a space where they can talk about these instances that happen. And there is something called the Discrimination and Harassment Council. And I think it's really important to let that be known and have that be a conversation. I don't know much about it, unfortunately. I wish I had more to share, but maybe we can share a link about it later, just so that the people who are here tonight know a little bit more about it. So yeah, that's basically been my experience as far as struggling with mental health. Like Jennifer, said, there's the microaggressions that you experience and macroaggressions. And then just even being a new paralegal, you feel like you're trying to catch up all the time, trying to figure out what you're doing. And for me, the way that I dealt with it, other than deciding to take that leave, which I think was a great idea, was to have a mentor and to find somebody who I could go to whenever I had questions, and just to be able to, recognize when I don't have all the answers, not strive to be a perfectionist, and just understand that it's a learning process. You're learning as you go. Every matter that you take on, you'll learn something new. And I think even if you are a seasoned professional, you're still learning for every case that you take on. So that's what my story is. And I do hope that us being here today and talking about this will give others the courage to open up about their experiences as well.
I value each of your experiences, and I would like to thank each of you for sharing those experiences with our audience. I may also ask another question, if you don't mind, Deborah.
Sure.
How do you cope with failure and not to feel overwhelmed?
That's an interesting question because I really think that failure is a perspective. And as I've grown, just like in my life, just personally, and also as a professional, I've learned that, failure is not really a thing. At least I don't think it is. I think it's more of a learning experience. So when you don't have the desired outcome, it doesn't necessarily mean you failed. It means that you're learning. You can be as prepared as you want to be, and it still may not go your way, and that's okay. As long as you have shown up for your client as competently as you could, done everything that you can to prepare for the case, even if you don't win, it doesn't mean that you lost necessarily. It doesn't mean that you failed. And I think that it's a perspective thing. So I think that if you can change your perspective and understand that just because it doesn't go your way doesn't mean it's over, it's not the end of the world. You just pick up, learn from that experience, and use it the next time. I think that you'll be okay.
Thank you, Deborah. I'll pass the boys over to Paula. Paula, please take it away.
Thank you, Leo. So we continue our questions. Is what would you say is a healthy mindset for your mental health in the legal profession? If I can ask Dr. Puri to answer this question.
So I'd like to start by just thanking, everyone here for being so vulnerable and open and honest. It's truly an honor to be on this panel with all of you. And I think that what Deborah has just said, it really struck a chord with me. And also what Jennifer shared earlier. I'm also a woman of color with disabilities. And, there's a lot of systemic discrimination. There's a lot of challenges and barriers that are microaggressions that are not necessarily visible and not necessarily seen by others. And that is, I also want to touch on what Dorian said earlier, because I feel that, yes, a lot of people in the legal profession and a lot of people who are in these professions that are high stress and, high achieving type A people, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be perfect and excel and not fail and all of that. But I think when you're a person of color and a person who's had historic disadvantage, you put that much more pressure on yourself to prove that you are worthy and you deserve a seat at the table. And I've seen it a lot where a lot of people have that imposter syndrome, right? And that imposter syndrome is very, very real. And you push yourself, and with that pressure, with that stress, all mental health, everyone has mental health. I really believe that. I think it's a spectrum. And I think that with stress, it can crank it up. And the past 2 years, we've been in COVID. Okay, this has collectively affected all of us. But I think people with, additional challenges, it's been cranked up even further, that vulnerability. And when things are unpredictable for type A's, I keep saying type A's because, people who like structure and organize and want to be in control all the time, be able to plan and organize things. Well, guess what? There's a lot of unpredictabilities out there. We don't know still when COVID's over. We don't know when lives will be returning back or will they be returning back. And for paralegals, I know, and for a lot of, organizations that I do consulting with, a lot of these systems and processes, like all these learning management systems and paperwork and the way that signatures happen legally and all these documentations, this is all new stuff. I remember I did a couple of contracts for the Office of the Children's Lawyer, and now everything is through video, right? So you're doing investigations and you're trying to go into people's homes through the electronic stuff, and you have to record things, and there's a lot of obviously thinking about privacy issues and confidentiality. If something is being recorded, are you able to really see the whole thing? How objective are you being? There are all these additional things that we never had to think about before. So there's like these additional pressures to learn new systems and strategies. It's not just what we were doing before. And being able to adapt to change is in itself stressful. And now we don't have that social support as much, right? So I want to really highlight this, that, there's a lot of talk in the media and the popular media. And I think the more you tell yourself something, the more you start to really believe it. So when we're saying physical distancing is not the same as social distancing, right? Like, we need each other as human beings, all of us. We need social support. But when people say, no, I can't be around people, it sort of starts to become, I need to do this alone. I need to feel competent. And if you have that imposter syndrome and you want to put that pressure on yourself that I need to do this quickly, and especially if you need to do things fast, but you have to be careful, because especially in the legal profession, every little thing, every little period and dot, and you have to be very, very precise, right? You have to be very, very careful. And you don't want to miss anything. So that stress will really crank things up. So it becomes more than stress, it becomes distress. And then I'm concerned for everyone. And really the mindset is about adapting a resiliency way of looking at things. I think Deborah said it very beautifully. There's no such thing as failure. I mean, this is all new stuff. Like, this is a big sociology experiment we're in right now. And, what is perfect? This is all the new normal. And being kind to ourselves and being compassionate with ourselves. And especially if you're a person who has faced microaggressions and is facing all these challenges, acknowledge yourself. What you're doing is hard. You're going against the grain. I mean, that's not easy, right? But I feel that instead people put more pressure on themselves instead of being kind to themselves. They're like, come on, why can't you do this right? People are going to laugh at you. What are people going to say about you? And then that self-talk, that negative self-talk that we say over and over and over again, it starts to become almost ingrained, right? It's like an internal brainwashing that happens for people. And I specialize in cognitive behavioral therapy, and one of the tenets is really what you tell yourself affects obviously how you feel, and then obviously how you behave, right? And sometimes the behavior is conscious, and sometimes it's not conscious at all, right? And so it does lead to sometimes maladaptive behaviors. I'm really impressed with, Beth, thank you for sharing, your story. I mean, to resist substances and resist things that cognitively, this is going to actually be not good for me, right? Like, I could go there, but being able to having that foresight and thinking about, okay, if I do this, this is going to get me into further problems, having that ability to look forward and look at the pros and cons, that takes strength. That takes a lot of strength, because if you don't want to feel pain, the first thing you want to do is maybe reach for a drink, or you want to reach for something that will numb you. But if you have a routine, and that's what I tell people, the number one thing you can do for yourself is create a routine for yourself. It's hard with COVID, right? We're working from home, sleeping different times, the cell phone keeps going off, the technology's there, and I think all that COVID fatigue, and they're calling it techno stress or whatever, it's making people meld, like there's no boundaries, but separation between personal space, home space, workspace. It's all kind of together. And that affects your mindset, obviously, right? So, before, if you were used to going to the office from 9 to 5, having your lunch at a certain time, doing these things, going to the gym maybe after work, everyone had this kind of routine. And now with the hybrid models and with the, working from home and all of that, that's maybe created more challenges, and then all these new systems. So my best advice would be, depending on your situation, depending on your responsibilities and all of that, one of the things I will be talking about shortly is how we can develop like sort of a way to manage our stress. All we can do is try to manage our stress the best we can. We will always have stress. I mean, if you don't have stress, we're not going to be alive, right? We all need a little bit of stress in our life, but when it's too much stress, we need to find coping strategies and mechanisms.
Thank you, Dr. Puri. That was very well said and very informative. Deborah, would you like to add to that?
Sure. I would say that another thing that helps me deal with mental health issues and just my mental health in general is to having that ability to, not just the ability, but the willingness and the ability to self-evaluate, and to also have someone who I can have hold me accountable. So if I know that I'm steering off the path, so to speak, I can say to myself, okay, I can't do this. This isn't going to work. I need to take a break, or I need to delegate, or I need to call someone and just vent or something like that. And even having that person who, if they're somebody that you live with maybe, or someone that you work with, noticing when you're doing things that are leading to, just going down the wrong path. So having a friend or a family member or a colleague just kind of nudge you and say, hey, you said you weren't going to work past 8 o'clock on Monday night, so stop doing it, just something like that. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important to have those people in place and to have that mindset in place yourself. So yeah, it's definitely important to be able to self-evaluate. And there is something called the mental health continuum. So I would definitely suggest that you look that up. I love that. It really is a way to see where you are on the spectrum, because as Dr. Puri said, it's a spectrum. Everyone deals with mental health at some level, and to deny that it's there and to deny that it's something that you need to pay attention to, it doesn't make any sense. At the end of the day, it's just as important as your physical health. And we have no issue trying to avoid, getting a cold or a flu. So we also need to have that same mentality when it comes to our mental health. We need to think about prevention and treatment, and to take it very seriously, because your mental health is a part of your health.
Yeah. The only thing I would like to add to what Deborah has said is that I agree with those strategies in terms of, contacting people and all of that. But I always tell my clients that, yes, unless you have some people in your life, and you're very blessed if you do, that are completely objective, and that really do have the best intentions for you, that's great. But remember, people are not always available, and they might be dealing with their own stuff. So it's also very important to learn your own internal coping skills, right? So practicing mindfulness meditation, for example, learning ways to self-regulate and calm your system down, and be able to journal and reflect and all of that. So you need to also be your best friend in life. Yes, we need people.
Absolutely.
But we also need to rely on ourselves, because people may not always, they might sometimes actually make us think something different. Oh, you should do this, you should do that. And then what about your internal voice? You have to learn how to listen to, what do I want though, right? And so that is a skill. And that's when coaches and mentors and therapists can be very helpful.
Can I jump in on this for just 1 second, Paula?
Absolutely.
In the legal profession, the way this manifests in terms of how I describe it for people is talk to someone, open up to someone, just pick carefully. So you're going to work in a law firm and you're going to be, over anxious about something. You don't just go to the first person you see or the senior partner or whomever. You may not get a very nice reception. So that we're trying to be honest about this, right? Not everyone is not judgmental. Not everyone is empathetic, but lots of people are. So what you're looking for is being selective, because we are attachment creatures. We do need other people, but we need to make sure that those other people that we connect with are people who are going to make things better for us, not worse. Like Dr. Puri said, people who aren't going to judge us, who aren't going to just throw up their opinions on us. They're going to honor our boundaries. They're going to listen. Yeah. I'll talk in a little while about the member assistance program, peer support program, because that's one of the examples that we have of someone to connect with, someone to get support from, that you can have some assuredness that they're safe to talk to. That's a big part of making sure you use those social supports, but in a way that's going to be helpful.
Mm-hmm. And Paula, I just also wanted to add, sorry, I loved what Dr. Puri said about meditation. I think a lot of times we hear the word meditation, it kind of scares us off if it's something we've never practiced, but there's so many different types of meditation. So it's something I think would be beneficial for people to look into. I mean, you can meditate while you run, or you can meditate while you just sit there. Like it's not as difficult as we think that it is, and it's really helpful.
That's great.
Thank you, everybody, for such a wealth of knowledge and advice and some guidance for mental health. So we know that life is very busy, and let's find out, how can we make that a mental health a priority, and also how can we identify it? If I can ask again, Dr. Puri, to kind of start the discussion on that.
Okay. So what I was going to do is actually engage all of you in an exercise. So for the members of the audience, we can't see you, but what we're going to ask you to do is to participate via the chat box. So you can just give your response, and even the panelists, I welcome you to join in on this activity. I do this quite often with my clients. It's sort of like a little needs assessment, if you will, on yourself. So if you take a piece of paper, and you draw a big circle and you divide it into 4 quarters. Okay, so this is like a wellness wheel. I don't know if anyone's ever done a similar activity before like this, but basically the premise is that for wellness to occur, for us to be resilient, to as much as possible to buffer against the stresses from the outside world, we need to make sure our internal world is as stable and as strong as possible. And in order to do that, we have to nourish all 4 areas, right? So you're drawing the circle, you're cutting it into 4 quarters like a pizza, and you have 4 pieces, 25% each is all equal. And so we're going to start off talking about what is health and wellness, right? So for wellness to occur, that happens in 4 areas. So in the chat box, or the panelists or anyone who can unmute can also just say it out loud. What is one component of health? One component of health. Okay, somebody has written down mental health. So one of the quadrants would say mental. Okay, so there's mental health. What's another type of health? Physical, thank you. So physical would be another one. Okay, so physical, mental, two more. Spiritual, good job. Okay, yeah, so spiritual when the other quarter, and one last one. Okay, nutritional would go in the physical, so that's a good thought. But okay, sexual. Okay, so again, we can talk about that. No, so social would. Okay, so I'll just tell you guys. So the last one is emotional. Okay, so we have physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. Right? Mind, body, spirit, idea, right? So there are differences. The reason why we, usually when I ask this question, the first thing that comes up is physical health, is because that's tangible. We can see it. So somebody's saying they're having, stomach pain or digestion issues, or they're having a headache, or, they're not sleeping well at night, or those kinds of things. We can see that. It's tangible. But the more we go around the wheel, sometimes it's harder to describe exactly what the outcome measure would be to evaluate that. Okay, so people can share, definitely people who've had lived experience of mental health issues can definitely share what an outcome, like what that experience could be like, and how their brain might feel, how they might feel emotionally, and all of that. So that's an example. But let's just start with the physical. In order for me to take care of my physical body, usually people say nutrition, yes. Exercise was mentioned, yes. And as Beth rightly pointed out, exercising produces endorphins, it produces serotonin, all these things, right? So we have nutrition and exercise, but there's more than nutrition and exercise for physical. What else? Sleep, thank you. Yes, sleep is critical, okay? A lot of people are just not sleeping very well. Yes, stress could be a contributor, but it's also, the UV light from the phones and the computers and all the technology that we have, that has increased. I've seen a lot of increase with my clients telling me that, yeah, it's not that they're not tired and they're not overly stressed, but they just, because of all the technology, their brain is not producing melatonin as much as it did before, and it's affecting their quality of sleep. So that's another one. Movement, we've mentioned physical. Okay, so what else? Think COVID, think physical. How am I going to keep myself healthy physically? So our immune system, big, right? So a lot of our body is actually functioning, right? Our organs are functioning, and we're not consciously thinking about, okay, my liver has to do this, my kidney has to do this, but our body is doing that. It's a type of stress, right? So when you're filtering the toxins and all the germs around us and the hygiene, right? So hygiene is a big part, the physical part. Skin care, right? All of that. So when you think about physical, when you get a chance, think about all the aspects of physical. Okay, so we don't have time to get too deep into that right now, but let's just say that's physical, okay? Now, I want to compare mental versus emotional. They are distinct. Everything is related. That's why it's in a circle. One thing does affect the next, affects the next. Yes, it's a domino effect. But emotional and mental is different. Can anyone share how is emotional and mental different? It's linked, but it's different. My emotional health versus my mental health. So CBT therapists might know by sort of our model. Yeah, okay, emotional reaction, mental process. Very good. Whoever said that, Lisa, I believe it is. So our mind is our thinking. So these are our thoughts, and emotions are our feelings. So if you think of it that way. We have two parts of the brain, right? We have the emotional brain, the limbic system, right? That's the amygdala that gets hijacked when we're facing stress. Our brain thinks flight, fight, freeze, right? Automatic reaction, survival mode. The more we tell ourselves, oh my God, people are going to laugh at us. I'm going to screw up. I'm such a failure. I'm such an idiot. I can't do this right. I'm overwhelming myself. I'm getting myself more aroused, excited, scared. So fear, anxiety, stress, all that stuff, right? limbic system goes off, what happens? This part of the brain, the frontal lobe, it shuts down. Our rational thinking shuts down when our emotions are too overwhelmed, right? And then what happens? When you can't cognitively think, you can't make good decisions. You can't, think about pros and cons. You can't problem solve properly. You might be irate with people, with customers, with clients. You might be short fused. You might not communicate clearly. There's a lot of things that can happen, right? So we want to make sure that this is why, as Deborah was saying, meditation, mindfulness, any type of mindfulness activity will help your brain to kind of, it's like rebooting the computer. You shut the computer off, then you put it back on. And then it starts to, start working hopefully more efficiently again. Because if you're just on overdrive, it's going to crash. Your brain is going to crash. So this is why it's really important. So there are distinct things that we can do to nourish our emotional health, such as, which was mentioned in the chat box as well, and Deborah had mentioned a few other people, is social support. Okay, so social support is a part of emotional health because it affects our feelings, our relationships with other people, including ourselves. So self-esteem, self-respect, how I talk to myself, how I care for my feelings is the emotional health piece. Does that make sense for everyone? Okay, so yes, so relationships are there. Other things that, think of it this way. If you think of a parent and a child, I hate to use this example, but it's a good metaphor. So think of the mental health as the parent. The parent is telling the kid just cares about feeling good, right? I want candy, I want to play a game. They don't think about consequences or, the parent is the one who has to discipline and say, okay, in moderation is okay. You can have a little bit of your candy, but you need to make sure you eat your vegetables, right? So your brain is thinking about the logic, about what's right, what's good for you, like from a logical perspective, right? It doesn't care necessarily about having fun and not being productive. So being productive, organized, all of that is brain. And emotions are just about feeling good. I want to feel good. So what do you think is more important? Like if we just listen to the parent all the time and never let the kid have any pleasure or any fun in life, will that person be a good, a stable person? No, we need both. We want to be happy. We need enjoyment from life to feel fulfilled and complete. Not everything is productive and getting things done and all that, but we also need to be responsible, right? So there needs to be a balance between the emotional and the mental, right? So in terms of emotional, I would also add is hobbies and interests. You wouldn't believe how many clients I have. I ask them, what do you like to do for fun? And they're like, well, I don't know. I just go to work, I come home, I make the food, I clean the house, I go to bed. Same thing starts every. So it's like they're like a machine, right? But I say, you're not a machine, you're a person. And including all the people working, right? Like all of you, you're people. So you also need to have hobbies and interests and other things that you do as outlets, right? If you don't have those outlets, what's going to happen to you? You're going to snap, right? So hobbies, relationships, what else? Does anyone else have any thoughts about emotional health? What can I do to feel happy, feel good? Daily gratitudes. Okay, yes, so we will get into that part. Okay, so this is something, again, like I said, the more you go around the wheel, it becomes a little bit more challenging because sometimes we have to think about that. What nourishes my feelings? It's also about how we treat ourselves, that self-compassion, that self-love, the self-esteem, that's in the emotional realm as well. positive affirmations. Very good. Okay, so let's leave emotional health for a second. Let's go over to mental health. So for me to be the people who are able to exercise their brain, get the intellectual stimulation, learn things all the time, question things all the time, not just black and white. Those are the people who are able to expand their mind, right? So when you're in a jam, if something happens that is unexpected, a person who is more intellectually, mentally inclined, who can problem solve and analyze things and say, okay, this didn't work out, let me find another route to get what I need, right? Like that, your problem solving mode, right? That's a cognitive thing. But if you're somebody who has not developed that way of analyzing and questioning and all of that, you might just say, everything sucks, like it's over. Like that's it. This was the only thing and now that's it. Because they feel like once they're in that jam, they can't get out. They're a victim of their circumstance. So I always tell clients, pick, even though you may not think it's related, learn a new language. Right? Read a book, do some puzzles, crosswords. If some people get it through their job, like your job is intellectually stimulating. I'm assuming if you're a paralegal, if you're in any of these professions, you're thinking all the time, you're analyzing all the time. So you're getting that stimulation. But for some people, I know they're not using their brain that much at work. It's sort of autopilot. And so for them, they need these additional things to challenge their brain. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, so we talked a little bit about mental. We talked a little bit about emotional, a little bit about physical. What I always suggest people do is, after we do this exercise, get a big construction board out or something, draw a big circle. It's like your vision board, right? And you put it and flesh out the specific things for yourself, right? And what you do is use a traffic light idea, where green means you're doing it, like you're working on this on a regular basis, routine, all that stuff. Like, for example, taking medication consistently or exercising consistently, that kind of thing. If you're doing it sometimes, like maybe a couple of days you do it, a couple of days you don't do it, you're not consistent, it's a yellow. And then if you're just not paying attention to this area, it's red. So that way the traffic light helps you to like monitor yourself and self-evaluate on a regular basis, okay? So the last one I'm leaving is now is spiritual. And I find a lot of people in our society don't talk about spiritual, but it's extremely important to talk about spiritual, okay? Because we are spiritual beings. I think a lot of people have different understandings about what that is and are afraid to talk about it. But it is really how you ground yourself and how you connect with yourself. And that's what I was alluding to before, is that yes, we need people, but we also need to have a good sense of who we are. If you've chosen this profession, why have you chosen this profession? Is it just financial, or is it for some, you want to make a change in the world, you want to make a difference? Like what is your why? And I think when people are aligned with their why, who they are, they can, then start to plan strategic goals for themselves. It's very similar to when you do strategic planning with an organization, if you've ever been involved in that, is you always ask an organization, what is your mission statement? What's your vision? What are your values? And that's usually on the website. And why do people do that? Why do we start there to plan anything? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Why do we talk about that stuff? Not just as a marketing tool. Sometimes I've heard that in groups, but why do people say that? Because everything you do then, everything you operationalize is aligned with that. And when that's called being grounded. So if we relate that to spirituality, when I'm here because this is what gives me purpose. This is my why, and this is my vision. This is what I hope to do. And, these are my values. And if you're being authentic and you're showing up as your true self, you are going to be more of a complete person. You're going to be more at peace with who you are. And there's different ways to do that. Basically, reflection, meditation, mindfulness. There's lots of ways that people can learn to do that. And through COVID, so last thing I'm going to say, I know I've been babbling for a while, I apologize, is we've realized that a lot of things are just not in our control. And so if that's the case, then we have to, it's been sort of a spiritual reflection time for a lot of people to realize, well, what is the purpose of life? Was it just working and killing myself with stress? Like, was that the purpose? Or am I reevaluating now my time with my family? Or, am I reevaluating where I've been spending my energy and my time? And people are having these kind of existential crises, or if you will. So, what I'd like to leave you off with in terms of this exercise is, and then I would like to get some thoughts from you, is on spirituality. A big part of spirituality is to feel grounded, and grounded means to be at peace. Okay? So when I say peace, if I feel peace, it doesn't mean I'm so happy, like the emotional health, like, happy. I'm just content. Like I accept my situation. That is not easy to do, right? To accept the things that you can't change. Right? What can't we change? We can't change, for example, the past. We can't go back there, right? We can only change the future, correct? So if I say for you to not be angry, to be upset, because the emotional self is going to get you, hyper, like, this sucks, I need to do something about this, whatever. Your spiritual side will say, okay, what do I have control over? What do I not have control over? Wisdom, my higher wisdom is my spirituality, to be able to say, okay, where do I want to spend my emotional resources? Right? Do I want to waste it being upset? Do I want to forgive people for, even if they don't deserve it, to get that heavy burden energy off me? What do I need to do to feel good in my skin? Right? And there's a lot of sort of tips and strategies with that. But I'd like to just hear one last, because spirituality is loaded and we certainly don't have time for it on this panel. But I'd just like to hear some thoughts on this wheel in general, if you'd like to share. And in terms of spirituality specifically, how do you define it? Because, everyone defines it differently. Everyone connects to that differently. For some people, it's religion, but spirituality, when I'm talking about, is not religion. I'm not saying it's about religion. It's about what you have faith in, what is your core values, your mission, vision, values, if you will, and how that makes you conceptualize the world and navigate basically where the ship goes in your life. So any kind of thoughts, even from the panelists, if you have any thoughts or comments on this wheel, or any of the people in the audience on that. I heard positive affirmations in the group, and you're absolutely right. Gratitude is a way of finding that peace, for sure. And that's a common exercise I do with organizations, is when I'm working with teams, I say, okay, so COVID, I know we're going to talk about COVID. I know everyone's going to be negative, talking about how COVID sucks. I agree it sucks. But what have you learned about yourself in terms of a positive thing over the last 2 years? And some people say, I've never thought about that. And then they go, well, I've gotten better at technology. I'm spending more time with my kids. I'm learning how to cook at home. So then, okay, once we start to, pay attention to the good things and being aware of that, and being grateful for that, that brings more of that to us. I have some more comments. I can't read. Can somebody read in the chat box. I'm missing authentic mission of self-acceptance. Beautiful. Yes, self-acceptance is peace. So that goes with the failure. Instead of saying I suck, I'm such a loser, I can't do anything right, the imposter syndrome thing that we're talking about. Like, look, I've faced these challenges. I've tried my best, as Deborah was saying. Like, I showed up to the best of my capability, and I should be proud of that. Like, I need to self-recognize. When the world doesn't recognize me, I need to recognize myself. Right? Absolutely. Authentic mission of self. You guys are getting it. I appreciate that. Framework of self-development, self-actualization. Yes. You're using the Adlerian words. Beautiful. Great. Excellent. Excellent. So yeah, those are, any other comments or thoughts, or we'll go to the next person. But thank you for listening, and thanks for your participation.
Thank you, Dr. Puri. That was a great exercise that we can all take home with us and definitely just think about and guide us through. I'd like to hear from Beth. Again, my question was how, with life being so busy, how can we make mental health a priority and identify it?
Yeah, thanks very much. And thank you, Dr. Puri, for that exercise. I found it very interesting, and I'll have to get my Bristol board out and go through it. And I think really what it emphasizes is the idea of having our routines and be aware of what is working for us. And if we start to diverge from that to say, hey, what's going on? Maybe I'm struggling a bit. It's like Deborah had mentioned the meditation, like doing good mindfulness meditation. Well, I try to do it 15 minutes a day. Well, if I start skipping sessions, then I'm like, okay, Beth, what's going on? Why are you missing sessions? And what's the impact on you of doing that? So those routines really offer an objective state of mind for ourselves to notice, and for our loved ones to say, hey, Beth, you haven't been doing your meditating lately. What's going on? So in terms of people who we don't know as well, like we may not know what their routines are, in terms of identifying what may be going on for them. In this era of COVID, we're doing so much by video conference now. And so things are a bit different. So if people are not turning their cameras on, it might be a sign that something's going on. Or someone is appearing on the camera, but they're unkempt. They have bags under their eyes, that sort of thing. Yawning. They seem to be lacking motivation with their schoolwork or at the office, getting things done, not completing tasks on time. And this may be more than just a lack of motivation. If you're living with anxiety or depression, it can cause reduction in memory, and it can cause an inability to concentrate. So that can lead to missing deadlines. And changes in social behavior. I find this one particularly interesting, that someone who's normally outgoing and talkative, everyone's friend, all of a sudden is keeping very quiet, not saying anything. Or the alternative is someone who's normally an introvert is all of a sudden being outspoken and maybe even a bit assertive. And that might be a sign. Irritability can be a real sign of mental illness, including it could be a sign of addiction as well. So bear in mind that people like paralegals, lawyers, people in the legal profession, we tend to have very good poker faces. So we may be suffering on the inside, but on the outside, we look fine. So when I talk to managers, I'm like, be aware if someone is coming to you and saying that they are struggling, they probably really are. They're probably past the breaking point of most people. So in terms of how we can help our colleagues, the first thing is to just educate ourselves more about mental health issues. So the more common ones, right? Depression, anxiety, bipolarity, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, addiction, eating disorders, and so on, and learn about what can be done to treat mental illness, because I think you'll find great comfort that there's a lot that can be done to treat mental illness if people get the help that we need. Doron had referred to that program, the 6-hour program by the CBA, Mental Health and Wellness in the Legal Profession. It's a terrific program. So we really have to check in with our colleagues. So if you see someone come on the screen and they've got their arm in a cast, you're probably going to ask them, hey, what happened to your arm? And similarly, if someone doesn't appear to be doing that well emotionally or mentally, I better distinguish the two, it is fair enough to ask them how they're doing. Historically, we haven't wanted to pry into people's personal problems, but we really do have to break the silence around mental illness. With all of the advocacy work that I've done over the last 4 years, I realize just how much people want and need to talk about mental illness. Of course, it depends on your relationship with the person, what kind of chemistry you have with them. But generally speaking, we don't have to tiptoe around the subject of mental health. So if you see someone, maybe a classmate, maybe someone in your office who seems to be struggling, you can just ask very basic things like, hey, you don't seem to be yourself lately. Is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to help? A sensitive subject, but I think one that should be touched upon, is suicide. At the Ministry of the Attorney General a couple of years ago, we had 2 suicides where assistant Crown attorneys actually took their own lives in their office. And it was obviously a very traumatizing experience for everyone, especially the families and, of course, the individuals who made that decision to take their life. So if someone appears to be at risk of suicide, ask them point blank if they're thinking about taking their own life. This runs counter to what used to be more commonly held fears that talking about suicide may make matters worse. But I read a study and that the majority of healthcare professionals think it is best to address it right off the bat, because it gives the person the chance to talk about their problems and be heard and know that somebody cares. So I think I'll stop there.
If I could just add to what Beth has just said, I do agree that we need to check in with that person and talk to them directly, but I also think that there's a program called ASSIST. I don't know if anyone's heard of this, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. I think that any organization and definitely professionals in our field should be taking this training. And it's about, if somebody has suicidal ideation, they might be just thinking like they're not happy. They want to, I might as well not be here. What's the point? What's the purpose? And I find that's a space to work with people on their spiritual work of who they are, their mission, like why, maybe they're not feeling connected. And this is happening a lot. I'm really glad you mentioned suicide today, because I think it's really the ideation, suicidal ideation has gone up since COVID began. And I might as well not be here. Nothing's ever going to get fixed. So this is the opportunity where interventions like CBT, other types of treatment are really useful. And there are a lot of virtual apps that I think we will talk about later that are helpful. But also trying to assess in ASSIST, we ask people questions about this. So how would you actually plan to take your own life? Have you thought through the plan? Because sometimes people just say that. And then if you're really concerned that they're actually going to follow through with a plan, that needs to be reported, right? Because this is, they're at imminent risk. You have a reasonable suspicion. That is our responsibility, I think, as clinicians anyways, for myself. If I hear a reasonable concern, then that should be reported.
Thank you so much, Dr. Puri and Beth. Very difficult subjects to discuss and to talk about. And I'm glad that we have this forum to do it in. And hope again that, this will help somebody. So our next question is how to approach and continue the dialogue actually around the stigma of having a mental health illness or even asking for help? If I can ask Doron to answer this question.
Of course. Thank you, Paula. Wow, lots of good stuff being said here tonight, isn't there? Notice the language around mental health and mental illness. Notice difficult topic, touchy subject, delicate. We're talking about it, and in some ways we tiptoe around it because it's uncomfortable, because we don't want to make other people uncomfortable. We don't want other people to think ill of us. And so we think it's a downer, and maybe we shouldn't talk about it. Maybe we don't want to, other people have, enough problems. We shouldn't put that on them. And so what you have in a population like paralegals is exceedingly smart people who have good brains, who therefore can conceptualize in their minds, in that cognitive part of the brain that Dr. Puri talked about. They can take tiny little bits of information and spin them out into complete catastrophe, one of the styles of cognitive distortions that she would talk about in CBT. Catastrophization is something legal professionals do really, really well because they hold it in. So the world inside their head is the world. And if they believe that they're a big failure, they are a big failure because that's the only truth they know. And they're not talking to anyone about it because they're stigmatized. They're stigmatizing themselves. They're stigmatized by the profession. They hold it in. They think, if I think I'm a loser, then why would I talk to anyone else? Because what's that person going to do? They're going to project their own self-judgment onto every other person they meet and assume they will judge them just as harshly as they judge themselves. So why would I talk to anyone about this? They're just going to confirm what a loser I am. So I hold it in. I isolate, and isolation is the single worst thing that a person can do when they're in distress. Human beings need to be comforted and validated and healed and be involved in supportive communities and supportive therapeutic environments. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately for people in the legal profession, hiding that is part of protecting your reputation. It's part of protecting your licensure with the Law Society, we think. It's part of avoiding people not thinking ill of us. So for instance, an example would be, actually Beth is a great example of this. Someone speaking very openly in the legal profession about personal challenging things with courage. And instead of having her lose all influence and all trust by people, because why would anyone want to work with someone with bipolar disorder? She is instead top of her game because people see how compassionate and brilliant she is and how they want to work with her. And same thing with so many other people in the legal profession who have spoken openly about what they struggle with, in spite of the fact that the profession, lots of people in the profession might have told them, don't do that. No. Don't talk to people about that. Keep that to yourself. What we want you all to do is realize that there are kind, supportive, non-judgmental people in the profession that you can lean on, because to be alone with your struggle is to perpetuate your struggle. It's to avoid healing. It's to avoid even believing that healing is possible, because you probably don't believe it for yourself. You're going to be harder on yourself than other people might be. So fighting stigma, fighting this particular kind of stigma, is about breaking down those barriers of fear and shame that we carry with us that weigh us down. We're all here to tell you, I think, that this is not a profession full of robots, and this is not a profession full of judgmental people. Yes, there are some people called judges who judge a lot, but this is not a profession that is all judgy people. A lot of really kind people. You see a few of them here. Holding it in is not healthy for you. Sharing it, seeking help, not being alone with it, is where healing happens. It's where stability happens. It's where you can stabilize. And as Dr. Puri talked about, cope better with the struggles you have. It's not the weight that you carry, it's how you carry it. I believe it was Lena Horne, a famous jazz singer, who said that. We all have struggles to cope with. Are we just coping in healthy ways? And one of the ways you cope in a healthy way, say it out loud. Yeah. Don't keep it to yourself.
Thank you so much, Doron. If you can chime in, Deborah, and give us your thoughts about I guess, the dialogue around the stigma of having mental health illness and asking for help.
Yeah, I certainly agree with Doron on that. It's really important to just keep talking about it. I mean, I keep saying this, but I love that we're here tonight having this conversation publicly and sharing our stories, because the more we hold it in, the less other people feel comfortable to do the same, to share their stories. My story of just having the issues that I had in court and dealing with systemic discrimination was something I didn't talk about a lot at first. And now I talk about it all the time because I realize so many other people have experienced the same thing. And the fact that we have spaces where we can come and share our stories and get help, it's important to note that those spaces are there. I think the thing with mental health is that we often, because it's invisible, most times we're not able to look at it as something that's real. And I'm a mom, and with my kids, I teach them to wash their hands. I teach them to take care of themselves, eat right, and get exercise and all of those things, because I don't want them to get sick. So in the same way, it's like, why would we not teach our children the same when it comes to mental health? Why don't we teach them how to prevent getting in a space where they're too dark to talk about it? Why don't we teach them that there is treatment, that even if you are in a space and it's something that you can't help? I mean, I have a close family member that lives with depression and anxiety, and it's something that's normal in our family. We talk about it because it's nothing to hide, and it's nothing that person should be ashamed of. And so I think it's really important to just keep having the conversation at work, at school, on the job where you can. I think that as employers, if you own your own firm or if you work in a firm, you should advocate for a space where it's safe to talk about that. I think that that's really the most important thing. Just keep having the conversation. With our organization, OABP, that's one of the things that we do. We continue to bring it up. And I think it's because, I had my own struggles with mental health, and I have a family member who's had that struggle. And I just really feel like it's something that we need to make sure our members are aware of, that it's a struggle. It can be a struggle. It's okay to talk about it. You're not alone. And there is treatment out there. There's something that you can do. So again, let's just keep talking. I hope we get to have this conversation again sometime soon.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Deborah. Beth, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, sure. In terms of disclosing one's mental illness in the workplace, it can be daunting. And how it can start out is by talking to one person. And I did that. I talked to sort of my best friend at the office, Sari, about 10 years ago, and she was the one and only person I spoke to at the office. I was just in her office one day and I kind of blurted it out because I trusted her so much. And she's sort of one of these natural born therapists. And we had a great conversation, and she was so supportive. And it was very nice to know I had someone in the office who I could go to if I was feeling vulnerable. And then a few years later, two of my colleagues talked to me separately about mental health issues in their families. One had a daughter living with depression and anxiety, and one had a mother who was living with an anxiety disorder. And I just made the decision to tell them. I thought I'd really be able to help give them support and some ideas. And that felt great. It was very cathartic. So then I told a few more people at the office, and that went well. And then I finally told my boss, and everyone was so extremely supportive. And I made a presentation at my branch, and they gave me a standing ovation. And then I went on to become a real advocate, speaking, at these sorts of gatherings. And being a member of the Bell Let's Talk campaign and writing an article for the Globe and Mail. And I say this not to pat myself on the back, but to say to you, with all of the advocacy that I've done, I have not had one negative comment to my face. Not one. And I'm sure there's whispering behind closed doors, for sure. There are jerks out there. I know they're jerks. But what I've realized is that the jerks are far outnumbered by the good, compassionate people who really care and who are also on a mission to end the stigma and isolation surrounding mental health. So I'm not recommending that everyone disclose. Some people are dealing with such serious anxiety and depression that it's the last thing in the world that they would want to do. But I am saying it doesn't have to be as scary. And in fact, it can be quite cathartic and empowering and invigorating to share your story.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. I mean, just great, great, great information. And just, I love the stories. I'm sure our audience does as well. We're moving on to our next section, which is mental health for paralegal students. And I will turn it over to Sharon.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your for sharing and the insight. It's just been a wonderful discussion here and lots of learning. For this one, what kind of initiatives can any student association or any organization create to help student demographic and legal professions with their mental health issue? Jennifer, maybe you can start on this point.
Thank you, Sharon. Doron talked about supportive communities, and personally, I've found social support through the Women's Law Association of Ontario because it offers programs that support wellness, such as mentorship, which is really an opportunity to be matched with someone more senior, networking opportunities or social opportunities, which give one an opportunity to connect with people who may have a similar experience. We also share resources through our website, and we've had events that highlight mental health and highlight the experience of others in order to inspire. And we're very committed to changing the dialogue about bringing stress and mental health challenges to light. So I would encourage anyone in the legal profession to support and be a part of an association that most aligns with you and shares your values. As members of the Ontario Paralegal Association, take a look at what else is offered. And if you're interested in the Black Paralegals Association, consider connecting with them. And if you can't find an association or group that's right for you, then consider creating one so that you can build your own community for your own support and to support others.
Thank you, Jennifer. Dr. Puri, would you like to add to any of that?
Yeah, I would concur. Having a mentor, a professional mentor, is really helpful. I'm a part of the Ontario Association of Social Workers. I'm also with the Ontario Psychological Association, which is also called OPA. And so I do think that there are opportunities to meet people that way. I also think that aside from reaching out to organizations, there are a lot of amazing virtual applications now, and there's a few that I wanted to highlight. One in particular, it's called Bounce Back Ontario. So I don't know, if somebody can type that in, bouncebackontario.ca. And it was created by the Canadian Association of Mental Health. And so it's basically, it's a free account. Yourself, your kids, anyone can set up an account, username, password. There's many different modules on mindfulness, meditation, cognitive behavioral therapy, really good resource. Another one is called Big White Wall. Okay, so that's also an Ontario resource. And there's one called Headspace. I don't know if anyone's heard of Headspace or Calm. There's so many different applications, but I think we're in the day and age when technology can be really our companion, especially during COVID. We may not always get access to a person or a therapist, but if you want something accessible, something that you can use right away, I use often in conjunction with my wheel that I was talking about. I use notifications. So I have a Calm app, and if I'm working for long hours and I'm not getting up for a stretch or a break, it'll go off and it'll say, oh, water break. So it'll make an alarm and it'll remind me to get up, stretch, go have a glass of water, come back to my seat. So you can plug these things in for yourself. You can organize yourself that way. And then that really alleviates a lot of stress for me. So I think self-monitoring is the key. And there's a lot of great resources that also the Canadian government, not just the Ontario government, but actually if you type in mental health COVID-19 supports, you will find a plethora of resources that the government has been offering for free, including internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy, which is offered on the Homewood Health website as well. And I'm happy to type in these things in the chat box as well if you like.
Thank you, Dr. Puri, for sharing those ideas. They were great. I know earlier we talked about physical, emotional, and spiritual health and mental health balance and some exercises. You gave us some great exercises. Is there anything else you want to add to it? And what kind of therapy might be out there that can help students, paralegals?
So if I could just start off by saying when people hear the word meditation, like I think Deborah was mentioning, people sometimes get intimidated what that means. It means a sort of a space when you're not thinking. So imagine if you're not thinking for a minute. Do you think you can actually shut off your thoughts for a minute? That people are kind of scared, right? Like a whole minute. Our brain is constantly thinking about something. And so being able to shut the brain off, even for 20 seconds, maybe start at 10 seconds, then move up to 20 seconds. Challenge yourself to do that. One of the easiest things I like to do is, because I'm a foodie and I love food, is I do this with like my bowl of oatmeal in the morning for breakfast, right? So you can notice this with yourself. If you just eat and you're on your cell phone and on the phone and watching TV and typing something and eating a bite of food and drinking your coffee, will that be more of a enjoyable, satisfying experience? Or what I do with my oatmeal is I look at it, I smell it, I don't have my phone, no technology around me, not talking to anyone. It's 5 minutes, but 5 minutes, I am just eating the oatmeal, not doing anything else. Okay, and there are studies that show this. I've also studied Ayurveda, which is it's a traditional Indian medicine, and what they say is actually if you chew, right, you really chew your food, you're producing more saliva, right? And saliva has enzymes that help you to break down and absorb the nutrients in the food better. So you'll find that your digestion will be better too. People are eating fast and quickly, drinking their coffee and all of that. They're having more and more, you probably hear it all the time, a lot of people can't eat gluten, can't do the dairy, their stomachs are a mess, they can't do this, they can't do this, because we need to slow down. And we might feel like we're not being productive, like we need to do 5 things at once, we need to multitask, but actually the brain gets taxed and you can actually be more efficient if you do something for 5 minutes, but just do that for 5 minutes, you're done. Then do the next thing. So it's really about retraining our brain. So I would say anything that you do, even if you're talking to someone, let's say if I'm having a conversation with a client, if you're like looking at them using your nonverbal communication, you're totally engaged with that person, you make them feel valuable and recognized, right? If you're trying to type something and you're like talking to them and you're doing several things, people sense that energy, right? And the more, everything is energy. So basically when we're talking about mindfulness or that awareness part, it's about really engaging in whatever you're doing. And if you just start practicing those little exercises throughout the day, when you're with people, you're really with people. When you're eating, you're really eating. Whatever you're doing, you're really doing it. You're gonna see it's gonna really change the way you feel, and then just change your whole outlook on things. So try that out as an exercise, and I would love to get some feedback on that. But for me, it's made a huge difference. I used to have all kinds of intolerances to different types of foods, and then I just started slowing down, and you wouldn't believe what a difference it's made.
Thank you. I'll definitely try some of those to slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
Doron, do you have any thoughts on mental balance and give us some ideas on therapy?
Therapy, I'm not going to get into in terms of details of different types of therapies because, first of all, I'm mindful of time, but I'm also mindful of the fact I don't know that that's what this is for. What I want to say about therapy is that people think about it often as something sick people do. They go to the doctor when they're sick. So I have to be in a really bad place in order to need therapy. And that's not really what therapy is. Therapy is management of life. That people, it doesn't mean everyone needs to be in therapy, but it's really a spectrum of people, from the people who are struggling with suicidal ideation or depression or anxiety, to the people who just feel somewhat off, are trying to be proactive about, not falling into a depression because they've had depression in the past, people who are going through career stress and they want to just sort out where they are in all of this. It's back to what I said earlier about not being alone with it, getting some type of an objective, compassionate, and non-judgmental voice in the conversation. So it's not just the critical voice in your head. It's a more well-rounded conversation that is probably going to be much kinder to you than you're being to yourself, and has some insight, because that person, you are sort of in the middle of your storm. If you're picturing Wizard of Oz, you're in the middle of the tornado and the house is flying and there's a cow flying by your head. You don't have a lot of perspective in that moment. But someone standing outside of the storm can look at it with a calmness and an objectivity that allows them to point out to you certain elements of it, allows you to look at it from different ways, framing it in different ways, seeing things from different perspectives, including a compassionate perspective. So the most important thing, and it's been shown in most of the studies of therapy, the most important thing in psychotherapy is not which modality you apply. It's not, are you an interpersonal therapist or a cognitive behavioral therapist or an emotionally focused therapist? It's, are you connecting with the therapist? Do you feel comfortable, validated, heard? Does the person get you? Do they hear you? Do you feel like you're being heard? That's 75, 80, 85% of the therapeutic relationship. Everything else is gravy. You start with, do you feel like you're now with someone who gets it and who's with you when you're going through what you're going through? Because it's a core element of personal distress that a person who is in distress shouldn't be alone with it. You don't have to even talk to the person, but that my old therapist, when I was going through particularly difficult times, used to put tell me to imagine a screen up on the wall and to picture that 8-year-old boy crying on his bed, and then tell me, go sit with him on the screen. Just picture myself going and sitting with him. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to reassure him. He just shouldn't be alone. That's what therapy is. It's just, it's not being alone, and it's being offered a perspective outside of your within the storm perspective. And it is for everyone, anyone who can avail themselves of it. And in this case, all of the paralegals here, I'll tell you in a second how you can avail yourselves of it in our program. Don't hesitate. It's not, you don't have to wait until you're at that precipice and you're desperate and now I really need to call a therapist. Be proactive about it. Do it early. If you're feeling a little off, go talk to someone. Don't hesitate.
Thank you for that. It was very insightful. Beth, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd love to follow up on what Doron was saying. I really think that virtually everyone can benefit from therapy of some kind, right? Because it's just a matter of us looking into our own issues, right? Like whatever our triggers are, because we all have triggers. So let's examine them and figure out how to deal with them. And if you find a good therapist, you can do that. I'll just talk generally about my experience with therapy. I've done all sorts of different types of therapy. And it started out with a psychiatrist when I first was living with depression. And I can tell you that guy was crazier than I have ever been. And I saw him for about 20 years. And the thing with him was he was a great medication guy. Like he understood psychiatric medication. And I give him a lot of the credit for me being well today because of his knowledge. But in terms of sort of the psychotherapy side of things, he was brutal. I could tell you stories, but we don't have time. And then I've seen several psychologists over the years and have really benefited from those interactions. And I'll see someone for a year or two and then I'm doing well and I'll stop and then I'll pick up another therapist after that. So that's why I've seen so many over the years. And I have to say I've had the best luck personally with people who have masters of social work. And I'm not entirely sure why that is. I think it's something to do with people who go into social work are really interested in human nature and the dynamics in relationships. So I've been very fortunate.
We're just nicer people.
We're nice people.
Much nicer people. And I have found benefit in cognitive behavior therapy. What I actually prefer to that is dialectical behavior therapy, which has some of the components of CBT, but also brings me into our bodies. And that can be very helpful, because sometimes if something is making me anxious, it doesn't matter what it is that's making me anxious. I'll spin around with whatever the issue is. What I really need to do is address how I'm feeling in my body first, in terms of, and that's going to help me deal with the anxiety. I put it in the chat. My favorite mindfulness app by far is 10% Happier. There's a book that goes along with it. It's sort of, it was thought up by a guy who's a journalist down in the States, who was a real cynic around meditation and mindfulness. And of course, at the end of the day, he becomes a huge proponent. And it's just really nice. There are sort of 15-minute segments, 5 minutes of talking, and then 10 minutes of a guided meditation. And I find that 15 minutes I can usually work into the day. And sometimes he's quite funny as well. So I find it motivating to keep doing it on a regular basis.
Well, thank you, Beth. That was definitely very insightful. I'm going to pass this on to back to Scott now. He will finish off there.
Thanks so much, Soren. Wow, what a great talk and discussion tonight. We do have one question that we would like to have answered, and that comes from the audience. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah right now. And Sarah is going to ask the question to our panelists. Feel free to answer, anybody who can answer. It is the question that we have from one of our audience members, and that's Melanie. Take it away, Sarah.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I just want to say thank you, Scott, for the introduction there. So we have one question from Melanie. And the question is, do you find that mental health and mental well-being are acknowledged in a positive way in the court system? So this question is for any panelists here who'd like to answer.
I can speak to this. I think historically, as the other panelists described, there's been a lot of stigma around mental health, and it leads often to questions about competency if you have a mental health issue. But I think things are starting to change. And what was, I think, especially momentous was the speech given by the Honorable Justice Strathy, the Chief Justice of Ontario, at the LSO Mental Health Summit. And I think Doron was speaking at that event. But his speech was incredibly moving and talked about his own experience of having a parent with mental health issues. And I think that with these kinds of conversations happening and people starting to speak out about it, I think things are slowly changing. I don't think they've completely changed, but I think there is work to do. But I think it's very refreshing to see conversations coming from high-ranking members of the judiciary. So I hope that answers your question.
Go ahead there, Beth.
Yeah, thank you. I want to contrast two judges. One, I think I have his name wrong. I think it was Justice Ledane back like 30 years ago. Doron, yep. You're nodding. Yep. You know who I'm talking about. Okay, Justice Ledane of the Supreme Court of Canada. And he had mental health struggles, and he had a major depressive episode, and he needed time to step away from the bench. He needed a mental health leave. He had no intention of retiring, but rather he just needed an acknowledgement that he was going through this and maybe a short break. And he was told, no, you can't. And he basically was kicked off the bench by Chief Justice Dixon. And it was a tragedy. Well, fast forward, and it wasn't acknowledged at the time. It's only been sort of in recent years that it started to be acknowledged. And then fast forward to 2019, where Justice Clément Gascon on the Supreme Court of Canada had a depressive episode and serious anxiety. And he ended up he was sitting in court, the 9 justices were meeting, and then there was an afternoon break, and then he did not return to the court, and sort of there was a bit of a manhunt looking for him, and he was located, and he was sort of just having a very challenging day, to say the least. And the support for him was incredible. Like, the Chief Justice came out and said that we fully support him, that this has absolutely no impact on his ability to do the job. So there is change afoot, and we're going to continue to see that change. I know we're running out of time. I'm just very quickly going to tell you, there was a study in 1961 of about 1,000 American doctors, and the doctors, 9 out of 10 of them said if they found out that one of their patients had cancer, they would not tell that person that they had cancer because of the shame associated with cancer. Well, 60 years later, right, we're relaying for life and running for the cure, and the guys are wearing mustaches for Movember. And I am hopeful that the same will go for mental health, that it's just a matter of time before the stigma of it is really reduced profoundly. And starting by having a talk like we are tonight helps in that, helps make that happen.
Yes, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, for that wonderful question, and thanks to our panelists for the answer. Excuse me. We're going to move on to the resources now, and certainly just give me one moment so I can change slides. And this will be the going to the end of our presentation, but we certainly want to share with everybody all the resources that we do have. And I'm going to take it to Dr. Puri to go over the resources that are available and all the things that we have discussed this evening.
Okay, so these are some resources that I often refer my clients to. They are free of charge since COVID began. The government has heavily invested, I think it's $50 million into this technology, into this website, into developing all these resources, and partnering with CAMH and other mental health organizations. But one of the ones that I really think is fantastic, that I kind of use in supplementation with the work that I do, is internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy. And like I said, technology can be our friend. It is accessible when we want to self-monitor ourselves. People have Fitbits these days, right? And you want to kind of check in with yourself, and you want to reflect on your thoughts and your feelings and all of that. This is a really great resource. They have different short modules and programs so you can develop those skills and how to train your brain. So not to go autopilot, but actually to question and think through what you're thinking. It's really great for anxiety, depression, and a whole bunch of other types of things. Bounce Back Ontario is fantastic as well. Yeah, so these 3 are the ones that I strongly recommend.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
So this was just a second slide for yours for the ICBT.
Yeah, so abilities.ca. So Monroe Chappelle you might have heard of. So they're really huge EAP provider, as well as Mind Beacon. They've developed this Ability CBT. And so it's all about developing resiliency skills and learning coping skills. So it was exactly what I was talking about. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. All right, Doron.
Thank you so much. I'll be quick. So I'm going to put,
Oh, you muted yourself.
How did I do that? I put in the chat the wellness, the member assistance program, which is what I'm going to talk about for a moment. The website is myassistplan.com. Phone number 855-403-8922. That is the organization that is funded by the Law Society and Law Pro, the insurer for the legal profession. It funds our providing an entire employee assistance program for the legal profession. That means paralegals, lawyers, paralegal students and law students, judges, and your immediate family members as well. A completely free program and a completely confidential program. So for instance, if you're concerned that if you called with some personal issues like depression or addiction or something like that, that somehow the Law Society would find out about it because they're the funders, doesn't happen. This is a confidential program. We are separate from the Law Society. We don't share personal information. And that's why it works. That's why so many people in the profession access it. And what they're accessing, again, I said free. I want to emphasize it because these types of services cost a lot of money for people. And it's part of the reason why they often don't access them. Counseling, first of all. So counselors like myself, in fact, we actually have 3 former lawyers who are now counselors on staff. And you can access counseling on a short-term basis, longer-term counseling. We have, as Dr. Puri mentioned about Morneau Chappelle, we have a free online CBT module. We have a peer support program, which is, in your case, paralegals who have been through life challenges, who have come back and offered themselves to be a support person, like I mentioned earlier about being with someone, a support person for another paralegal or another lawyer or a student, someone who's gone through something similar. So we match people based on the issue. So let's say addiction to alcohol. We would match them with someone who has suffered with substance use around alcohol, who speaks that language, who also happens to be a paralegal or a lawyer or a law student. And also we will match them on other criteria like gender or gender identification or culture. Or so, for instance, we have a peer volunteer who is a Black woman who deals with bipolar disorder, and we had a Black woman call us dealing with bipolar disorder, and we had the ability to match them, and there was such an affinity. Both lawyers, both women of color, both dealing with the same condition, and they can speak the same language about it, and that peer volunteer offers a kindness and an empathy that the person may not be used to receiving, and B, a map, a roadmap of hope. This person has been through similar things, and look at them now. They're in such a better place. Maybe that's possible for me too. I didn't think it was. So those are the kind of things. All you have to do is call that number, ask for counseling, ask for peer support. They're different things. Counseling is with professional counselors like psychologists and social workers. Peer support is just members of the profession who are there to listen. Those are both available to you, as are all the other employee assistance program services like nutritional counseling and new parent support. It's a whole wide range. If you go to the website, the myassistplan.com website, you can see all the different things that are offered. I'm going to include also I mentioned earlier the Canadian Bar Association Mental Health and Wellness course for legal professionals. I put it on there. It's free. It offers CPD credit, and it has 6 different video interviews, testimonials by people in the profession who've been through various challenges, talking about those challenges in a very open way. And you can see those recordings throughout the course if you're interested. And I also want to mention one other thing, which is the company that operates the member assistance program, Homewood Health, which Dr. Puri is very well aware of as well, also has partnered with the Canadian government for something called wellnesstogether.ca. Just look it up, wellnesstogether.ca. It's since the beginning of the pandemic, the Canadian government has essentially contracted with us and with Kids Help Phone to provide free counseling to everyone. Short-term counseling, but when you need assistance, you're not alone and money is not an object. So no one needs to hesitate reaching out for help in one manner or another, and I think we all hope you will.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you very much, sir. All right, so this kind of concludes our whole event this evening. I'm going to stop my share for a moment. I want to thank everybody for being here this evening, our wonderful panelists. I mean, this conversation has been so incredible, dispelling stigma, talking about mental health. I want to thank everybody that's been brave enough to give their own personal lived experience. I just think that that kind of discussion is absolutely incredible and certainly the kind of discussion that we need. I want to thank all the panelists again, all of the student committee that's worked so hard on making this happen. I do have some closing things that we do have to say on behalf of the OPA. And certainly we need to note that only active OPA members are eligible to receive certification for their annual CPD requirement. Please visit our learning and professional development portal at the opau.ca for the latest news, and announcements from the student committee and the education committee. Just a reminder to take a few minutes to complete our feedback survey so that you can help us improve our service delivery and membership. This concludes this evening's OPA series presentation on the panel discussion on mental health. We thank you to all our members and our guests for their participation. Good night, everybody, and stay safe.